hope you all had a great Memorial Day weekend. Welcome to our May 2025 Plants, Pests, and Pathogens webinar. I'm Araya April, your NC State Extension Master Gardener Program Assistant, and we're so excited today to welcome our guest speaker, Debbie Roos, Extension Agent, Sustainable Organic Agriculture of Chatham County. Debbie's going to talk to us today about Allium Leafminer, what EMG volunteers need to know. We're going to have a few minutes after Debbie speaks for her to answer a few questions. And then Matt Bertone and Mike Munster are going to roll right into our BOLOs, or the plant pests and diseases to be on the lookout for. After that, we're going to hear Plant These for Pollinators from Charlotte Glenn, along with a few important EMG program announcements that you don't want to miss. That is going to get us to 11:30 a.m. First, Charlotte and I wanted to express a deep gratitude to all of our volunteers, all of our wonderful professionals for your incredible work helping North Carolinians grow healthier plants, more sustainable landscapes, stronger, more resilient communities. So give a look at our 2024 impact report if you haven't already. You're going to see that we contributed more than 236,000 hours of volunteer service, reaching over 292,000 North Carolina residents with science-backed gardening knowledge. That's over 4,000 volunteers last year who contributed more than $7 million worth of work. All of that voluntarily invested in local community improvement. That is incredible. These are just some of our success stats. There are many more at the URL at the top of the slide. They illustrate what we can make happen when we learn and grow together. So now let's welcome today's guest speaker, Debbie Roos. Debbie has served NC Cooperative Extension since 1999 as an agricultural agent for Chatham County. Her extensive educational programming includes commercial and organic vegetable production, alternative agricultural enterprises, local foods, forestry, and wildlife. Debbie's award-winning Growing Small Farms website demonstrates her deep commitment to educating growers. The site includes over 500 pages of educational content, along with farm visit snapshots that provide the public an invaluable behind-the-scenes look at where our food comes from. Debbie also works with area farmers markets and is involved in statewide efforts to strengthen local food systems. Very cool. Debbie has also created the Pollinator Paradise Demonstration Garden in Pittsboro, North Carolina, which averages 40 tours a year. Hundreds of people visit that garden annually to learn about pollinator conservation. Oh, sorry about that. You can experience Debbie's educational content right now on social media, on her Facebook and Instagram. You don't want to miss her social media content. It's so educational and inspiring, as well as being beautiful. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie. Debbie, if you don't mind, I'll stop sharing and you can share yours now.
All right. Thank you, Araya. Appreciate that. Really excited to see everyone here. I wasn't really sure how many people were going to turn out for the humble Allium Leafminer, so I appreciate y'all coming here. Okay, let's see. Hang on a second.
You're good
okay.
with your screen share. Looks great.
Well, interestingly, though, it's not showing up on my screen.
Oh, no.
Or at least the presenter is showing up on my second screen, not my first screen. So I wonder, which I can work with, but I'm not seeing presenter mode, only just the primary mode on my second screen. Any thoughts on that? Matt Bertone, you helped me a minute ago. Like my primary screen I'm looking at, there's nothing on it except, yeah.
Oh, that I don't know. It's hard to
Okay.
see.
Let me try again. Let me do stop share.
And I know when I share from PowerPoint, and I have multiple screens, I put the PowerPoint on a different, on like the screen that's not my primary, and then when I hit present, it presents on my primary. So
how does it look now for you guys?
you're not sharing right now.
Oh, that's correct. Okay. Well, it looks great for me though. Okay, hang on. Sorry, guys. You know how this goes. There's always this little fun, part in the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now I got to get back to Zoom somehow. Yeah, it's like we've never done this before, right? Even though we've done it hundreds of times. Okay, so now I can't see Zoom. Hang on a second. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Okay, share. Don't worry. I won't. Presenter mode. There we go. Okay. All right. Now, how does it look for you guys?
Now we're seeing the presenter mode where we have
Okay.
both the split screen.
Okay. So
Look.
let me try display settings
Uh-huh.
and swap. Now, how does it look?
Did you click it?
So,
It's still the same. I don't know
Okay.
if
Hold on.
I
Hold
think
on. Now, not seeing. What are you seeing now?
it didn't change. It like went from widescreen to narrow screen, narrower screen, but it didn't change like it did when we tested it before.
Okay. Hold on. We'll just keep trying a couple of things. Stop sharing. Well, okay, weird. What are you seeing now?
Same again with the
Oh,
split
dear.
screen view.
Debbie, look on your
There we
there we
go.
go.
Now it's
presenter
right
view.
now.
Okay. Oh, we're
Yeah.
good. Yay. Okay. Sorry, guys. Sorry for that little rough beginning there.
No worries, Debbie.
Okay. So yes, so I'm going to be here talking about the Allium Leafminer today. We're going to go through some background. We'll talk about host plants and life cycle, look at what the crop damage looks like, and then talk about management. So as far as background, it started a little over a year ago. I have this listserv group called Growing Small Farms, which, yes, is the same name as my website. And we started having some growers discussing some unique onion problems they were having that they had never seen before. And these are experienced growers around the state. And one of the growers said, "Well, I think that's Allium Leafminer. Looks like Allium Leafminer." Well, I was a little bit skeptical because I had never even heard of Allium Leafminer. I've been an agent for 26 years, and I consider insects and pests kind of one of my strong points. And also, they were obviously not very sure, hence, the usage, the phrase "I think." So I did a quick internet search, and I didn't even see any mention of Allium Leafminer in North Carolina. So it didn't seem to even be a thing here. And then I called the Plant Disease and Insect Clinic and talked with Matt Bertone, and he did say, "Oh, well, we actually did have our first ever documentation of this pest just last year in 2023. They had a couple of samples come in from Orange and Guilford counties. So that told me, okay, so we do have the Allium Leafminer in North Carolina. Uh-huh. But still, I wanted to make sure that that's what we were dealing with, that these growers that they were discussing on the listserv. So I knew I had to go out and see it. So I emailed the list back and said, if you are seeing problems with your onions, please contact me. And I knew that I wanted to go out to these farms and see it for myself, in order to confirm and collect samples so that I could identify the problem. So that's kind of how I started going down the rabbit hole on the Allium Leafminer. Didn't think that that was going to be the year. I had no plans to do this, but that's what it became. So it was a very interesting spring, let's say. So I did some farm visits. This is a couple of examples of pictures with an onion crop and garlic crop on a couple of different farms here. And so before I went to the farms, of course, I started reading up on Allium Leafminer, whatever I could read, because I didn't know anything about it. And like I said, I'd never heard of it. And I didn't want to go out there unprepared, not knowing anything about it. And So once I learned something about it, at least on paper, I was able to identify it pretty quickly. And I'll talk about that later, about how I was able to do that. So while I was visiting the farms over a few days, talking with the farmers about, what they were seeing and what they were doing about it, and, what it meant to them, and the problems it was causing, and kind of the strategies that they were trying to deploy to, mitigate the effects of it. And then, of course, I collected lots of samples. I mean, I was leaving farms with literally trash bags full of infested allium crops. And then I would take these bags and go home at night at my house and just go through all of these samples and dissect them, just pull them apart and find, until I could find these tiny little larvae and pupae and inside, the layers and layers of these plants. And then I had set up a little, de facto photography studio on my desk so that I could take pictures of them. So that's what I did. And that was, it's kind of easily to become obsessed with things like that. I mean, I just did it, for days. I did that because it took days to go through all those samples and do that. And so this is currently the range of the Allium Leafminer. It is actually a fly that's an invasive pest from Europe. And it was first detected in the United States 10 years ago in Pennsylvania. So its range, basically confined to the Northeast, but as you can see from the map, it's now come all the way down to North Carolina. It includes Washington, D.C., and these other northeastern states here. So it's been around about 10 years, but it's primarily been causing problems in the northeastern states. So after visiting the farms and going through all the samples, I really started, and meanwhile, I was still being contacted by farmers. I really started getting a feel for how widespread the problem was and how serious a problem it was throughout the state. And I know from being an agent here for so long that alliums are a really important crop here, especially for our small farmers, that's selling at farmers markets. I started talking with some of our vegetable specialists, our entomologists, and it became clear, because we have never had this pest here before, that we were not really going to be able to provide much help as far as recommendations for growers on how to manage it. So this was not really a new position for me to be in, to be honest. My position when I came here 26 years ago was as the first organic agent in North Carolina. And as such, I often, to be honest with you, feel, especially in the beginning years, feel kind of on my own when I have to come up with management strategies for growers. If you think back into the old days, some of you who were around then, when you look at our NC State fact sheets about, whether you're talking about managing a disease or a pest problem, think back to the recommendation portion of those fact sheets. They never mention organic strategies. And so like that, if you're talking about a pest on apple trees or something, it just gives conventional pesticide recommendations. So if you're an organic grower, you're like, well, I guess I'm out of luck, So for me, who primarily, not only, excuse me, who primarily works with organic growers, I would have to go on my own, find organic strategies. So I often would turn to other states, other universities, and try to find those organic recommendations. And examples would be when basil downy mildew, this dreaded, disease that has been a deal breaker for some of our basil growers. first appeared many years ago in the state. I was talking to Cornell University and Dr. Meg McGrath, one of their plant pathologists who's done lots of research on this disease. I was talking to her about Cornell's research on basal downy mildew and their research into resistant varieties and organic strategies to manage this disease. And I would put that on my website and that kind of thing. When we had organic growers having troubles with nematodes in potatoes, I would talk to, where do you go for problems with potatoes? You go to Idaho. So, and this was only after talking to our NC State specialist and making sure that they didn't have, the information. And that was basically with their blessing. They would say, feel free to go to other states. So I was kind of used to having to do this. So with the Allium Leafminer, I was like, okay, since we don't have this pest here, where do I go? Well, clearly I go to the Northeast. I had been reading up on these papers, fact sheets that were out there. So I identified Dr. Brian Nault, who's a entomology professor at Cornell, who, by the way, got his PhD at NC State. And so fortunately, he was quite willing to talk to me about the Allium Leafminer. So he was very, very helpful to me. So I read everything I could on it, and then Dr. Nault and I became quite friendly. He was very patient with me with all my questions. So we had several Zoom meetings, lots of emails and phone calls, and he recommended I talk to a few of their extension agents who worked a lot with allium growers in certain counties, so they were helpful to me as well. So, of course, my goal here was to write an article to help our growers about the Allium Leafminer, since we didn't have anything like that, since we'd never had the pest really. So, I wanted to be able to understand, in addition to giving out information about the pest, I wanted to understand any potential differences between North Carolina and the Northeast. So, in other words, I can't just share a fact sheet from New York because we're not New York. The areas in New York where the Allium Leafminer were causing problems were in zones 5B, 6A, and 6B. Quite different from us. We're zone 8A here. And of course, the Allium Leafminer in North Carolina is throughout the entire state here in North Carolina pretty much. So that's what I was trying to do there. I hope that's pretty clear. But I was really thrilled that the folks in New York were so willing to help me with the background information. So let's look a little bit now on the host plants and life cycle for the Allium Leafminer. So as it turns out, the leaf-miner pests infest a broad range of alliums, and that includes ornamental alliums. So I know master gardeners and agents work not only with vegetable crops, but also ornamentals. So we need to make sure that, nurseries and landscapers are also aware of this pest. But, these crops include, pictured here, are garlic and leeks and ramps and ornamental onions. So all of those crops are susceptible to the Allium Leafminer. As far as the life cycle, there's 2 generations a year in the spring and the fall. Now, in the northeastern U.S., the first generation in the spring is active between March and June. And the flies start emerging from the overwintered pupae, which can be either in the soil or in overwintered crop debris. And they start coming out in March and then emerging for 5 to 6 weeks. And then the egg laying or oviposition occurs from March to May. And then those larvae, of course, develop through several instars before pupating in June. And then during the hot, dry, typically hot, dry summer months, the pupae estivate or become dormant through the summer. And then the second generation adults emerge in mid-September and October, and then have a longer period of egg laying in the fall. And then the larvae develop and complete pupation in November and December. But one important thing to remember is that this timetable is for the northeastern U.S. So we don't actually know the exact dates for North Carolina yet. So that's what we have to kind of work out. So since we're warmer here, we would expect to see earlier emergence, most likely in the spring. And since our summers are hotter and longer, probably later emergence in the fall, as they wait to avoid the heat. But we don't really have any data on that yet. So I hope that we can get data on that. We can, interest some researchers in that, perhaps. As far as crop damage, we're going to look at some of that. Now, the oviposition marks are what's going to make it really easy for you to identify the Allium Leafminer, because I don't know any other critter that leaves such signs as this. But just know that the crop damage from the Allium Leafminer can range from very minor, just cosmetic damage, to total crop loss, depending on which crop and the level of the infestation. But the earliest sign that you're going to be looking for that you have the Allium Leafminer are these oviposition scars that they leave on leaves. And that tells you that the adults have emerged, they're active, and they've started laying eggs. And again, as in the northeastern US, they start laying eggs about 10 to 14 days after emergence. And also note that the male and the female flies, they feed on the exudates that emerge from these oviposition marks. And also know that the female flies, they only lay eggs on a fraction of these oviposition punctures. And the larvae, the leaf miner larvae hatch from the eggs, and then they feed or mine their way down the leaf between the upper and lower leaf surface toward the base of the plant and into the bulb. But I think that these oviposition marks are beautiful, but that they're very noticeable. They're usually towards the top of the leaf, but I've also seen them in the middle of the leaf. I have pictures of that. But that's what you would be looking for if you're scouting for the pest, which I would recommend doing as early as February here. But see how they're usually in a nice, tidy, neat little row there? And in the right photo, you can see mining as well from the leaf miner as they're mining their way down the leaf. We can also see leaf twisting, because the feeding and mining can cause that leaf twisting and distortion. And then what causes, of course, the primary damage is the larvae and the pupae damage, and also just contamination. I hope y'all can see this. Again, boy, when I was doing all the dissecting and pulling apart, the layers and layers, some of these larvae are tiny. The pupae are easier to see, but this is a red bulb onion, but you see the white larva there, and there's a couple of pupae there. So again, pulling back the layers that exposes these hiding underneath there. And then here's another bulb onion, just a white larva underneath the layers there. And on this bulb onion, so this is the same onion, and on the left, you can see some pupae, and on the right, I've pulled back more layers that were, hiding even more pupae in there. So obviously this would not be an onion that you could sell, with that contamination. And just a close-up picture of the pupae here. And actually I can see to the left of the brown pupae, I can see underneath the layers there some larvae, just that the yellow of the larvae there. So those are some examples of some of the larvae. The onions, excuse me. And then here we have some leaks. So on the left, you have some mining damage from the leak, from the Allium Leafminer. And then on the right, I've peeled back the layers of the stem, and then you can see a pupa inside the layers there. And these leeks were planted in mid-February, by the way, in our area. Some more, still with the leeks, you can see the larvae, and on the left picture, you can see a pupa down on the lower left corner there. Quite a large larva there. And then on another one, you've got a couple of larvae inside the stem there. And now we're looking at garlic. They can also, the leaf miners larvae can damage the cloves, and also the pupae get trapped inside the wrapper leaves. So again, issue of contamination, that would not be a marketable item. You can see the damage to the clove on the right. And here in our area, garlic is planted in October and November. Now, this was really interesting. I didn't manage last year, and I didn't do it. Hopefully I'll get some pictures this fall of some flies. This Allium Leafminer fly, so apparently what happened here is it emerged from the pupa inside the garlic head and then just got trapped in there and died. But at least you can see a picture of the fly here. Again, not a marketable item. So let's talk a little bit about management here. So crop rotation is going to be really important. They're relatively weak flyers, so they can't travel long distances. So crop rotation is going to be a very important strategy. You want to plant your allium crops as far away from possible as previously infested crops or weeds. Crop covers are going to be your best strategy, and you need to protect your crops during the critical egg laying period in the spring and the fall, and they are going to be your most effective control. Those crop covers could be floating row covers or insect netting. They have to be installed before flies emerge. That's why we really need that data for North Carolina on when they emerge. And of course, they need to be really well secured to the ground with no gaps so the flies can't enter. And they need to remain on during the entire egg laying period. Obviously, you don't want to use covers on top of a row that was infested with pupae from a previous season, or else you're just going to trap the flies that are emerging from the pupae. So that's why crop rotation is really, really important. Here's some examples from a farm. This onion crop had very little damage compared to an uncovered onion bed nearby. And Dr. Brian Nault reports that crop covers provided almost 100% control in New York. So very effective if they're done properly. And here's a picture I took this spring at a Goodhart Farm of some insect netting that's been deployed for their allium crops. Sanitation is super important. You obviously don't want to be importing infested plant material onto the farm. Any purchased material is not imported from states. So here in Chatham County, a lot of our growers get their allium sets or plants or whatever from Country Farm and Home. It's a great organic farm supply store, not just organic, but they ship all over the state to small growers, and they source all of their alliums from a state that does not have the Allium Leafminer. And a lot of states are starting quarantine. I mean, they will not accept any crops from states that have the Allium Leafminer. So just make sure when you get plants that they're not coming from a state that has the Allium Leafminer. Also, just be careful with that farmer to farmer trading of plants that a lot of growers, or gardener to gardener, that a lot of growers and gardeners like to do, because that could be infested. Yeah, Dr. Nault, who I've been talking a lot about from Cornell, believes that's the primary way a lot of the Allium Leafminer is being spread from state to state is by humans, by spreading it through plant material. A lot of growers love to trade garlic across states. And also, of course, the nursery industry needs to be aware of this pest because it affects the ornamental alliums, and these plants get shipped across the country and get planted into landscapes. Destroying crop debris that's been infested can be done by burning or deep tillage. And, you can solarize soil for any infested beds to get the pupae that were left in the soil. And as far as insecticides go, Dr. Nault's done research on looking at organic insecticides, and he's found good results with combining a spinosad, or trade name Entrust, with Impede, which is an insecticidal soap. I've got the details of that on my article on the website. Again, the timing of it is very critical and also a little bit tricky. But he's found this is effective for when you have low to moderate pressure of the pest, and also have information on conventional insecticides from Jim Walgenbach, and those are on my webpage. Scouting, again, is going to be really, really important. You need to know when the flies emerge in the spring and the fall. The strategies of using the crop covers and also the pesticides absolutely rely on knowing about the fly emergence and flight activity. So as far, Dr. Nault did a little study on using yellow sticky cards to help with that. And he found that the Allium Leafminer was just not attracted to yellow sticky cards. They were more attracted to the crop than the cards. So you need to be, out there looking for the overposition marks. But of course, once you see those, they're already out. In New York, the agents, what I learned from talking to the agents in New York is that their growers rely on the agents to tell them when the Allium Leafminer flies are active. The growers are not doing it themselves. And the agents are planting sentinel plots or throughout the state. So they're usually using things like chives, and they'll also use growing degree day models. And basically they're using those. They said they're not perfect, but they at least kind of help them guide them on when to start monitoring the sentinel plots for ALM emergence. And then, so obviously the last piece of this, all the work I was doing to learn about this pest and to take pictures, to document it, all the, the symptoms and crop damage and everything. So the last part of that is getting it all pulled together into an educational document. And then I posted on my website, which already it's a 20-year. I've had that Growing Small Farms website up for maybe 23 years now. So it's well known among growers and gardeners. So that's where I put it. And then once I post the article there last spring, I used my email list and sent it out, reaches many thousands of people, and then also have an active social media network, I guess. So that went out to several thousand people. And I plan to use that page, to keep it updated as I learn more. I hope to do a grower survey. I had hoped to do it last year and things get real busy. So a grower survey to learn, the challenges to growers, how widespread it is, and what techniques or management strategies are working the best for them and those kind of things. So this is the Go link, the short link for you to find the webpage, the article. And I have some links to other resources and articles that you can read there about the pest. And we'll post any others that I see or that I find on there. So I'll leave that there for just a minute so that y'all can take a picture of it, or yeah. And all the pictures, most of the pictures on this PowerPoint are on the article. And then that's all I have. So we can, I'm happy to take some questions. About 5 minutes early, I guess.
Oh, thank you, Debbie. That was so informative. Cool photos. We do have a question. Are there any other similar pupae or larvae that we need to differentiate from?
That's a great question. The one that comes to mind for me is the seed corn maggot. which is also a fly. It has a broader host range of crops. It can affect onions and broccolis and cabbage, and it affects the roots of these crops. You're not going to see the oviposition scars. You're not going to see mining on the leaves. It just really goes straight for the roots. And if you look at my website, you will see articles and information about that. The larvae look a little similar, but you won't see the pupae like that. So yeah. Yeah. So that's the only one I can think off the top of my head, but it primarily causes wilting of plants. And again, because they're feeding on the roots, and they like high organic matter soils, and then the flies will come and lay eggs, and then they go straight for the roots. The larvae do. Yeah.
If you want me to add to that, Debbie.
Yes, please do.
Yes. So there is also the onion maggot, or the onion fly Tritoxa. I've never seen one of them infesting. They're called that, but I've never seen that. That's a little bit more distantly related. All the flies are they're going to look similar, the maggots, to kind of the untrained eye, but maybe a little different size, a little different shapes, and a little different kind of structures on them. But this is probably going to be now the most common fly that's going to be in alliums. The other thing too is to note whether you all are seeing decay, because there's tons of other flies that will come into decaying or start, if there's bulb rot or something like that before you may see some of the other symptoms, they can kind of come in and infest decaying material. So just be clear that you have something that's reasonably healthy other than the mining and maybe seeing some of those other symptoms. But there are some specific, if you wanted more information, or Debbie, if you want me to kind of help you give some more kind of specific, like looking under the scope at the structures for these to identify between other maggots, we could work on that too. But there are definitely some ways to identify the maggots overall. But yeah.
Very good.
That's
Thank
really
you.
helpful. Thank you both. We have a couple more questions in the chat. From Dawn, what depth would be appropriate for deep tilling?
Oh, it's going to be more than a foot. Yeah, it's going to be more than a foot typically.
Got it. And do you have recommendations for covers to use?
Well, so that's where you'd want to go to the place like your local farm supply store. So Remay is typically what you're using for a floating row cover. They have lighter ones for insect. And then the insect netting is a different product, but you're looking for as light as you can get away with when it's just for insects. But the insect netting is a tougher material. It's not a spun fabric like the Remay is. But yeah, that you can see a different selection of that at your farm supply stores.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
A question from Lynn. Can you explain growing degree days?
Yeah, growing degree days is a way to predict development of plants and insects, and you're basically tracking accumulated heat units. It's a better way to predict development than just days on a calendar, because it's accounting for actual temperature experienced by the plant or the insect. There's a lot of information, if I think NC State, Charlotte, does NC State probably has information on it, I bet? A fact sheet on it, or?
I was just looking for that. I did find the growing degree day calculator, basically, that's from our state climate office, that explains it a little bit and lets you put in dates so you can see where you are.
Yeah. So it's used by horticulturists, again, like I said, the agents in New York said it's not a perfect model, but it provides a guide, for them to know when to start monitoring the sentinel plots.
Excellent. Thank you. And Charlotte, do we have a couple more minutes for questions? I think we have a couple more in
Yeah, I think we've got about 5 more minutes.
Okay, great. Mike says, I'm about to harvest about 200 garlic plants. I have a few plants that look weak. If I find indications of the leaf miner, should I report it to you?
You don't really need to report it to me. But if I send out a survey, probably if I send out a survey, I'll make sure Charlotte gets a copy of it so she can share it with Master Gardeners. So then I would like you to fill it out. Because basically, I might even get Charlotte to help, help me with questions. I'm trying to decide what questions I want to put on the survey. Part of it is wanting to know the geographic range of of the problem. I know we've got people in the mountains that have the problem because a lot of people have been contacting me, but I'd like to get a feel for, where in the state we're having it. And yeah, so you don't need to really report it to me unless Matt needs some kind of, for the clinic's sake, but I don't until I do, because I'd rather wait until I have a formal way to collect that info, like through a survey, you know what I mean? Yeah,
Yeah, that makes sense. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Matt.
Yeah, we're not officially tracking it, and
Yeah.
I'm going to assume it's probably going to be widespread across the state in no
Yeah.
time. And I imagine too, it'll be starting to travel a little further south into South Carolina and other areas. So I think the cat's out of the bag now. It's been around for a couple of years, and Debbie obviously has seen a lot of it around the state. So I'm not sure how south you've seen it, but like I said, at some point it's going to be moot anyway when the whole state is kind of has it present. So
I know Brian and Cornell was really like, oh, what if it goes down? Like think about Vidalia onions and whatnot. So that's going to be woo. Down into Georgia and Texas and ay.
well, and the fact that
Texas is where a lot of all of the onion sets and stuff are grown, Dixondale Farms, and that could be a whole nother story. So yeah.
and of course with them having wild hosts, that's another issue is that they can spread through that even if they're not moving very far. If all these kind of bridging, the wild hosts are bridging the gaps between the agriculture areas, things like that, then there's plenty of wild alliums, and I've seen ramps with them, and as you mentioned, Debbie, so those, they're going to spread no matter what, I think.
Yeah, and some states are setting up quarantine programs, so I don't know how rigorous they are. They're trying to keep it out, but I don't, so we'll see how effective those are. Yeah.
And I'll mention, you were talking about some type of survey. So right now, Virginia is doing a community engaged science project. Grace Stern, who is my counterpart in Virginia, she's actually doing this as part of her, I think, master's study. And she's asking Master Gardener volunteers, agents, growers, farmers to report activity. So I'm going to drop a link to what she's doing in the chat. So that's I think she was, and she said if people beyond Virginia report, that was fine. It wasn't limited to just folks in Virginia to report.
Well, Charlotte, one thing we talked about last year, which we can still discuss is, maybe we can get master gardeners involved in helping with sentinel plots or something, master gardeners, I think we're involved and we're certainly with basil downy mildew, I love seeing master gardener volunteers involved in things like that can actually help growers, right? And gardeners, right?
Absolutely.
So so those are things we can put our heads together and because I was a little bit surprised, to be honest with you, when my New York counterpart agent, Teresa Ruzinek, told me that the growers relied on the agents to tell them, instead of the growers doing the scouting themselves, they relied on the agents to tell them when to do something, like when to put the covers on. I thought the growers would be doing that themselves. But they waited for the agents to tell them. So that it was on the agents to do the scouting. That surprised me.
Yeah. And one of the questions in chat, which I had dropped a link to your post where you listed some of the different hosts, but one of the questions was, were wild onions and garlic also a host?
Yeah.
Have you seen it on wild onions and garlic? Have
I
you?
have not.
Yeah.
Have not. And I got some of that in my pollinator garden.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say I had a terrible outbreak of Allium Leafminer last year on my shallots and garlic.
Yeah.
And so I didn't grow anything this year, and I've been checking the wild onions and also some chives I have in my garden. I haven't seen any
Yeah.
signs this year.
Yeah. I know they use chives as a sentinel plant. Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
And Debbie, you did mention in the North Carolina mountains, we've seen activity. So Barbara is asking, are there specific places in the mountains?
I know Asheville. Yeah, I don't remember exactly where, but I know we've seen them in Asheville. Yeah. Asheville area. Yeah.
Got it.
Is there a distribution map, Debbie? Do you know? Is anybody tracking it?
In North Carolina?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of, no. But that's what a survey would reveal that.
Yes.
Yep. I think this summer might be a good time because, it slows down a little bit in the dead of summer for growers, might be a good time to do a survey. Yeah.
Great. I don't see any more questions. Charlotte, do you think I missed any or?
Well, thanks, you guys. Great questions. Thanks
Yeah.
for being here and being interested.
Well, and thank you, Debbie, for doing all this legwork, and you've really done a lot of research on this, and it's really great to have people like you out there keeping an eye on these things and kind of getting the really important information, especially about management and scouting and things like that.
Thank you.
So yeah, good work.
Well, I'm going to stick around for the rest of the webinar. So.
All right. It was also great to hear kind of that extension journey part of it, of how you found it and you reached out to other folks and how you got the word out, just kind of the behind the scenes view of what we do, of how, we spread education and knowledge. Thank you.
Yeah, it's fun to, we love new challenges, right? Especially when we've been around for a while.
Keeps it fun.
Yep, thanks.
All right, we're going to kick it off to Matt and Mike now for our BOLOs.
Great. And I'm going to start first. Mike is in the waiting for when to talk about be on the lookouts for diseases. I'm going to talk about the arthropod BOLOs for late May and early June. So let's see, make sure we're all set here with. Okay, hopefully everyone can see this. Okay,
Yes.
great. Did not mean to go there. Okay. So it's starting to get warm out, and there's tons of things. I could have hundreds of slides of all the different things you guys see out there, starting to wake up and get active. But some of the most important things I'll mention are lots of young caterpillars. So that's the first thing. We're going to start seeing the bagworms. So here's, for instance, that is literally on that small, 8-inch portion of an arborvitae. We found 30 little baby bagworms right this time of year. So they're going to be very small. They're going to be hidden. You're not going to notice them until they get really big, and they're very difficult to control. So if you have plants that have infestations year after year, this is the time to be scouting for them because they're hatching and coming out and feeding on the foliage. And same with the webworms. The fall webworms, even though they're called that, are going to start coming out as start developing as in early June or so. There'll be very tiny bags, tiny caterpillars, but as the season goes on, they're going to get bigger bags, bigger nests, things like that, and start doing some more stripping of the leaves of the plants they're on. You may see some sawflies out, so just like caterpillars, they're going to feed on different plants. You'll find them on pines and on broadleaf plants, similar to caterpillars, except for they have 6 or more pairs of prolegs, these little fleshy legs, and they only have a little single eye lens rather than multiple eye lenses in caterpillars. They're also typically not going to be hairy. They're going to be kind of warty or whatnot, but and sometimes feeding in groups as well. Everybody's favorite, the Japanese beetles, are going to start to get active soon. Their larvae are basically have started to kind of finish their development. They're going to pupate, and then they're going to start to emerge, and the adults are going to go off and find each other. They're going to find their host plants, which is very widespread. They have a wide host range, but most of the time people are going to see them on roses and grapes and a few other types of crops and hosts, but they are everywhere just about. Don't use beetle bags. They're just going to attract them to your yard. They can be knocked off into a bucket of soapy water, or just you can use certain approved products. And we do have a fact sheet online for Japanese beetles. Lots of bugs are waking up, becoming active, and larger populations. You can have lace bugs on several different plants. They're fairly host specific, so usually you know which ones you have, and you know which ones are being affected year after year. You're going to see lots of little plant hoppers, plant bugs, plant hoppers, all these different types of bugs feeding on plants. Many are kind of not going to be important, but others will cause kind of decent amount of damage in higher populations on plants. A fun one you might see for all those of you who love or love to hate carpenter bees, you may be seeing these very large flies, the tiger bee flies. They'll start to emerge from the carpenter bee nests that they've parasitized. So don't be afraid of these. They don't sting, they don't bite. They're very large flies, and they are beneficial in that they parasitize carpenter bees. Unless you love those carpenter bees to pollinate, and then, you know, I don't know if you like these flies, but of course, on a personal level, you know, watch out for mosquitoes and ticks. They're going to be very abundant right now, so protect yourself. You know, DEET works well on the skin for for mosquito repellency. It's not as effective for ticks and mites. For that, we typically recommend permethrin to be used on clothing, on shoes, not directly on the skin. And you know, after a couple washes, you'll have to reapply. But that going by the instructions, apply that to clothing and shoes, and that can help you while you're working outside, taking walks, hikes, things like that, from protecting you from chiggers and ticks and things like that. And of course, like I said, I could talk about all day about all the different creatures that are going to come out and about. Some of the ones shown here are some tephritid fruit flies that actually this species feeds. The maggots feed head down in the heads of asters. You've got this longhorn beetle feeds on asters too, the larvae born to the stems of them. We actually had an aster in our yard that had a necrotic stem or petiole of the flower, and I just noticed it the other day that a little tiny shed skin of a moth was coming out of there. So there were some borers out and about already. Lots of bees and lots of moths and whatnot. And just to mention a few specific things that you definitely should be on the lookout for, or we've been hearing word of, are first, I've been getting a lot of calls about ropes of maggots, or these trailing columns of larvae, fly larvae. Flies are on the mind today, of course, but these are the larvae typically of dark-winged fungus gnats, although sometimes we see mixed in, and I know Debbie has taken photos of these other maggots. But these worm-like, long snake-like groups of worm-like creatures, they're little white larvae with black, shiny black heads. These are going to grow up to be a fungus gnat. They will emerge sometimes in numbers, but typically you don't see them as much. But we are seeing right now the larvae, we think that once they're done feeding, they need to get to a new site. They'll kind of congregate and move together in unison, and this probably keeps them moist as they travel to a good site where they can pupate or whatnot. So we've had a couple calls of people seeing these and getting freaked out. They're completely harmless. They're just kind of it's kind of mass transit we're seeing here of these little maggots. We do want you to be on the lookout for spotted lanternflies. Right now at this time of year, we would be seeing the nymphs. So please do report if you're seeing them in your area. You're going to see the small black nymphs with white spots, or as they get a little larger, they're going to gain some red coloration. The adults are moth-like, but are going to be only developing a little bit later in the year. But they can be very abundant in sometimes. And at this time of year, you might even see the old egg masses on trees. They kind of look like mud that's been stuck up on the plant with small barrel-shaped eggs underneath. And so there is a known population in Kernersville. There was just a report or a notification from NCDA that there is another population I am drawing a blank now. It's a little bit north of Kernersville in a new county, but it's close by there. And so just be on the lookout for them. Let us know if you see any of these out, and they will be found on various plants at this time when they're young, because they're not specifically feeding on any one plant when they're young. And finally, the big hornets, the big wasps are out and about. I've been getting a lot of calls about these as well, and a lot of emails, people claiming they found a giant, northern giant hornet, a murder hornet. Just note that there are several species out there that are large and native, or at least well established. We do have guides online on how to tell them apart, but basically the main thing to look for is if you find a very large hornet, if it has little teardrops or little spots near the stripes, it's going to be a European hornet. That is by far the most common that's confused for the northern giant hornet. Northern giant hornet was only found in the Pacific Northwest, and apparently it's been eradicated from the U.S., but we can't guarantee that there's no extra interruptions that might happen. As the months go on, as we get closer into late June or so, we're going to start to see the cicada killers emerge as the annual cicadas emerge. And so they'll be out and about hunting those cicadas. And of course, we do want you to look out for the yellow-legged hornet. It's a bit smaller than these large wasps. It's only about an inch long, the largest ones. They have these yellow tips of the legs, and they have a very dark body otherwise, with a very kind of darkish abdomen. There is a population of these in Savannah, Georgia right now, and they may be spreading. So we are definitely on the lookout for them. So with that, I'll take any questions or I'll field any questions. I'll hand it over to Mike.
Thank you.
I was giving a pause for people to ask.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Matt. We do have a couple questions in the chat. So Matt, let's see, this is from Horace. You mentioned webworms. Have there been any recent infestation of armyworms in North Carolina, specifically in the mountains? Should we treat our lawns and other plants now to avoid them? I believe they may start their devastation in the fall.
Sorry about that. Yes, that's a good question. Yeah, you don't have to worry about armyworms now. So armyworms, fall armyworms is what you're talking about. They're the ones that feed on turf. They do not overwinter in North Carolina. So you will only see them at earliest midsummer, late summer, and then early fall, because they have to travel up here. And it's going to be dependent on the weather systems and the populations down in the Gulf states and in Florida where they do overwinter and develop. Last year, what happened was, as the population grew down there, we had a few large storms that we think blew the adults up here. When the female lands here, kind of can lay eggs or mate, so you get a few of them around to the area, then they start to mate and lay eggs around. So this would not be something you need to worry about right now. But I would definitely, if you're worried about them in the future, hopefully people will be finding them early enough that you can also look for the damage quickly enough to keep them from damaging the lawn entirely. Looking out for the egg masses on plants and on buildings is also a really good key, or if you see the adults themselves, and they're not super easy to ID from some other similar like moths, but yeah, let us know if you do see anything and want confirmation. We can take a look.
Got it. Thank you. And then a second question about cicadas. What is the current activity in Western North Carolina?
Yes, so I have been getting, just got an email about some down around Asheville, so they are emerging. They've probably started to emerge. I saw some rumblings of them last week or so. So they've been probably emerging slowly for the last couple weeks. But they're probably going to be active for another few weeks, and then you'll see them decline fairly quickly after that, and then be replaced by our annual cicadas, which are not as abundant and whatnot. So that is one of the periodical cicada broods is emerging out in the mountains this year. So kind of in the band of mountains, you're going to start to see these cicadas then. And basically this is we're not going to see any more cicada and periodical cicadas probably until 2030, I think I read. So we're going to get a little brief pause, and then I forget which brood that's going to be and where that's going to emerge in North Carolina. But the ones in the mountains, after they're gone, you may see damage next year. They are damaging sometimes the twigs and branches of plants now. But I would say for most ornamentals or yard plants, don't worry about it. They're not going to kill the plants. We are a little more of the commercial woody plants are a little bit more worrisome, like blueberries and grapes and things like that they might damage the actual twigs that may reduce yield and whatnot. So yeah. So okay. And let's see, it looks like, do tiger beetles normally severely decrease the carpenter bee population? Oh, so there must be tiger bee fly. So nope, they are, most biocontrol is not 100% or not even close. So unfortunately, they don't kill all the carpenter bees out there, but they are helping to reduce the population, let's just say. And then I see another question for the armyworms. Yes, they are very quick. So, well, you can start to see, if you start to see damage for armyworms, there are ways to do a soapy water flush of your lawn to tease the caterpillars out. Once you identify the small ones, you can control them. But I would definitely read more on the fact sheet on how to scout and to manage those.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for your questions. We'll move it over to Mike.
All right, good morning, everyone. And for the first time here, transmitting from our new digs. I don't think, Matt, you didn't mention it. Let me give you the 5-second tour here. So down at that end of what we call the crop station area is where Matt is located. And then the next station for the vegetable diagnostics. And then here for ornamentals, commercial. And of course we share the home and ornamentals. And then the final station here is the field crop station where Swarna, who is in today but has stepped in the back room. I can't show you because of the length of the cable here any more than that right now, but the next time you're in Raleigh for your Master Gardener tours, you'll get to see all this in person. Hopefully by then the AC is fixed so that it's not running constantly. It's 59 degrees in here right now. So if you were to come today, bundle up. That said, let me go into our BOLOs for late May to late June in the disease department. We had last week our first case come in of fire blight. It was on apples. That's the photograph on the, oh, didn't update the date there. Or hopefully this is going to be the most recent version of the presentation. But that's actually May 2025 from Transylvania County there. Some twig dieback, blackening. Often you'll get the shepherd's crook. There's a picture from last year's sample. Pear is very susceptible. Apple is also quite susceptible. There are a number of other rosaceous hosts that do get it, but peach is not one of them. So if you see the symptom on peach, it's not fire blight. Another host of fire blight is loquat, and we got this sample in. This is just a couple of the roots from Onslow County, and last week. One of the things they suspected was fire blight, but you could see that the whole tree was wilting in the photograph, so it looked more like a root or soil problem. Couldn't really tell if it was possible cold injury, but when I took the bark off one of the larger roots, I saw the mycelium here, the whitish to cream colored fungal growth under the bark on the wood. So this is a very likely case of armillaria root rot there on the loquat, which is something to be on the lookout for in just about any kind of woody ornamental any time of year. Here was an interesting sample that came in, had other things going on besides this, but I don't remember seeing this for a long time. Of course, I was away from the clinic for 10 years, but I remember seeing this in the late 90s. And then again, it showed up last week on a rhododendron from Transylvania County, a bud blight. And if you look closer, you can see the sort of stiff bristles that are actually the synema, or the little columns of hyphae of the fungus as it produces its spores on the top here. And this is Seaferdia azalea. There's a couple of other synonyms that it has. So this can cause some damage to buds and twigs on rhododendron. Everyone pretty much will be seeing the different gymnosperangium rusts coming in the month ahead. We saw the teleal state on the junipers earlier in the spring, and now we'll be seeing it on the rosaceous hosts, including calorie pears, where it forms these papery coverings that are around the area producing the orange dusty spores. It'll also be on edible pears, service berries, flowering quince, different species of gymnosperangium. And on some of these hosts, it will give twig galls as well. And you can see in this close-up photograph. On apples, we'll be seeing early in the development of it, so probably now, be seeing the pycnial stage or spermaceal stage. It looks almost like insect eggs there on the upper surface of the leaf. And then as that develops later on the underside of the leaf, these are the esia producing the more powdery spores that will, if they're lucky, end up landing on a juniper and continuing the life cycle. And the overall impression then on the leaf of the apple or crab apple is these fairly bright yellow to orange spots all over it. So typical of cedar apple rust. Other things to look for on fruit in June would be scab and brown rot, then passing into the fruit phase instead of the blossom and twig phase that it has early as the peach starts to ripen. Scab is the one illustrated here. Fireblade again on apple, cedar apple rust, also Marcinina leaf spot and frog eye leaf spot, two things to look for. Here's the cedar apple rust again. Here would be the Marcinina leaf spot, kind of irregular borders, something like you would see with the black spot on Roos. In blackberry, cane blight, different rust diseases, and viruses are going to be things to look out for. With grapes, herbicide injury, for example, muscadine being very susceptible to at least some herbicides, and downy mildew, something to look for on grape. The downy mildews are quite host specific, and I'll say more about those a little bit later. I apologize for the photograph here, but it was a really good example at the bottom of the anthracnose, Aureobasidium, on Japanese maple. At first, it looked like spattering of paint or burn from some kind of chemical, but with incubation and close examination under the microscope, it turned out to be the fungus Aureobasidium causing this anthracnose. We can also see Philosticta on maples, not just on Japanese maple, but other maples as well. So these are common occurrences that you'll find this time of year. Back then to the downy mildews and contrasting them with the powdery mildews. So on the left, of course, powdery mildew that can either be on the upper surface, lower surface, or both. Squash and pumpkin are quite common hosts. And downy mildew on cucurbits, with cucumber especially, you'll see these bright yellow angular spots on the upper surface that then will die, and the sporulation, which will be more of a kind of a grayish, bluish gray color if it's been humid on the underside. And here's an example of a leaf with both. So you've got the dead spots where the downy mildew was occurring, and then the white patches of the powdery mildew. We have not yet seen downy mildew of cucurbits in North Carolina this year. Since it doesn't overwinter here, it has to come up from the south. And the closest report as of 6 days ago was in Charleston County, South Carolina. So typically late May into early June is when it arrives in North Carolina. Be on the lookout. Another contrast, but now between powdery mildew and powdery mildew, It can look very different, let's say on euonymus with the patches of thick sporulation, whereas on dogwood, especially as we get into the summer, well, instead of the thick patches you see here, it may be very faint and you have to kind of hold the leaf up to the light at an angle in order to confirm it. You can also get some deformation of the growth with powdery mildew on some hosts. Turning to the vegetable garden, of course, as the first clusters of tomato are ripening or developing, excuse me, then you'll start to see blossom end rot from that localized calcium deficiency. You can also see it on pepper. So it's not just a tomato thing. Of course, a physiological rather than a disease problem, but some of the diseases we see on tomato will be showing up. Septoria leaf spot, fungal disease, typically starting on the lower leaves of the plant and moving upward. Tomato spotted wilt virus, see here, and those sort of necrotic patterns and flecks, those would more likely be on the, well, it could be on the older leaves too, but you'll also see it up on the newer growth, which you wouldn't see it with Septoria. I didn't include a picture, but I had bacterial leaf spot on tomato in my own vegetable garden. There was some volunteers from last year that I kept, and it turned out not to be a good idea. I got bacterial leaf spot on them. I thought it was Septoria at first, but unfortunately it was the bacteria. Southern bacterial wilt, of course, causing wilting of the whole plant. So these are three of our big problems on tomato to be on the lookout for. Here is a picture of tomato spotted wilt virus symptoms on the fruit. So these necrotic spots and rings. That one is transmitted by, yes, thrips. And in many different vegetables and flowers, you may encounter root knot. So damage by root knot nematodes, malignant species, which if you're seeing wilting and unthriftiness, this would be one of the things to look for. But keep in mind that not all plants show really large galls like this. On some, it may be hard to detect. The ryope, for example, the galls from the nematodes are going to be smaller than the natural swellings on the roots. In turf grasses, which again, I always claim ignorance about, but I do have information from someone who knows, the butler, as we get into the warmer weather and the cool season grasses start feeling stress, we'll see brown patch, so on things like towel fescue and ryegrass. And you'll notice how a patch of fescue here was affected, and then patches of, I'm not sure what this other grass was here, were not. A dollar spot can be showing up on Kentucky bluegrass or ryegrass, and fairy ring on any kind of turf. You can see this is one of the type 1 rings, was just a green area. Type 2 would be having dead arcs or rings, and type 3 is where you actually see the mushrooms. And I think I've already seen my first chlorophyllum molybdetes pop up in the ground. So this is something to be on the lookout for as well. If there's a need to, there is a way for you to submit pictures and samples for mushroom identification, especially in a case where there's a poisoning suspected. And that information is on our submitting samples of something else web tab. If that's not enough BOLOs for you, always you can go to our website and click on the BOLOs link on the red banner on the left side. I have been not seeing the chat, so let's see if there are any questions. I mean, about the space, yes. Best way to treat fire blight aside from removing the branch? That is a really good question. During its active time of year, you've got to prune it out and you go way below, maybe a foot below where you see the damage, the lowest part of the damage, because the bacteria can get so far down. There are, for commercial orchards, there are treatments that can be applied. I'm not sure if they're still using streptomycin or not, but an antibiotic. I don't know if there's anything available though for the home garden. We don't really have a lot in our toolbox against bacteria like we do for fungi, so that makes this one a little bit difficult. Should we treat for the mushrooms? No, there's not really anything you can do to treat for mushrooms, since most of the fungus, the body of the fungus, so to speak, is the thread-like hyphae that are living, in this case, in the ground, or in some cases be in the thatch or in the wood if it's a wood decay fungus. So treating the mushrooms would be, never occurred to me, but it'd be like treating the flower of a tree, right? That's just the part of it that's producing the spores, or the reproductive part of it. If you do have pets or small children that might be in danger of consuming them, then just gather them daily as they're popping up. Large patches of brown on zoysia grass. How does someone treat it? That I would refer you to our turf diagnostic lab so that they can let you know for sure what it is and give you some guidance there. They are, you can get the link to them through our website. Also, just click on that you want to submit a sample of turf. Should anthracnose in red maples be treated? I would say no. It's a cosmetic problem. And so if you see anthracnose, if you see Philisticta leaf spot on those, they'll be self-limiting basically, and it'll be a little bit of cosmetic damage, but not going to be threatening the life of the tree. All right.
Thank you so
I
much,
will
Mike.
pass the baton back to our Master Gardener Program
Thank you. It's going to go over to Charlotte
gurus.
now. We appreciate it.
All right, well, it's time for our Plant These for Pollinators feature. Again, this is a new Plants, Pests, and Pathogens feature for this year, where we are focusing on some of the best plants to support pollinator populations, especially our native bees. And of course, you really want to maximize pollinator habitat, or maximize the value of pollinator habitat in your landscape by having multiple different types of plants in bloom throughout the entire growing season. So for our coming month of June, although it's already started blooming in my yard, our feature plant is milkweed. And depending on the species, milkweed, of course, is a common name. You may also have heard the name butterfly weed, but these are species and cultivars of Asclepias, which I was actually surprised to learn there are over 400 species of Asclepias found throughout the world, and they are distributed throughout North, Central, South America, the West Indies, and Africa. And quick fact, Africa has its own species of monarch butterfly, a little different than ours, but related. So we know our monarchs and their famous migration from Central America up to Canada and through the United States, which has garnered great interest in planting milkweed to support them. But those same monarchs have also been, our monarchs have also made their way over to New Zealand and Australia as well. But for us here, we're very interested in growing growing some milkweeds to support monarch species. Most of these plants are herbaceous perennials, and there's a lot of different species we'll take a peek at in a minute. Not all of them adapt that well to landscapes, but we're going to focus on those that are the best choices. But before we jump into that, just wanted to mention that if you've ever worked with milkweed and you've broken off a stem or a leaf, you probably saw some white sap come out. And that is what gives them that common name of milkweed. Is pretty much all parts of most species, but not all, will emit that white sap, which is toxic to a lot of insects. So it's a protection for them, although the monarchs can tolerate it. As mentioned, so this is the host plant for monarch caterpillars. They have a very specialized relationship with Asclepias. This is the only plant that a monarch butterfly can lay eggs on, and the caterpillar will be able to survive and develop by eating. So it's essential for milkweed to be available to monarchs all along their migration route, for them to survive and to continue into the future. But one thing we sometimes overlook about Asclepias is that their flowers attract many pollinators. So they're essential for the survival of monarchs, but the flowers themselves support many different pollinators, many different types of bees, butterflies, and their relatives. So they are wonderful plants to observe when they're in bloom, just to see a lot of different types of pollinators visiting the flowers. Quick look at the monarch life cycle. So again, these species of Asclepias or milkweeds are the only plants that can support monarch caterpillar development. So an adult monarch butterfly will lay her eggs on the leaves of Asclepias, a species of Asclepias. They are visible, but they're pretty tiny, so they're not easy to see, and you might need a magnifying glass if you're looking for them. This is the time of year we could start seeing these eggs. I haven't seen any monarchs yet, I don't believe, but adults or caterpillars in my garden. But I'm hoping to see some soon. So once the eggs hatch, they're little tiny caterpillars, and as they develop and get larger, then they become more visible and more recognizable with the yellow, black, and white stripes. Now, don't mix these guys up with the parsley, the caterpillars that are so common on parsley, which is the black swallowtail. Look somewhat similar, but those have more green, green and black on them with some yellow dots. So if you find something on milkweed or on an Asclepias species, it is a monarch. If you find something that looks similar on a plant that is not Asclepias or milkweed, it's not a monarch, or it's a lost monarch that's trying to find a milkweed. So very distinctive with their yellow, white, and black stripes. After they feed for a while and get to be full size, they will form a chrysalis, which is just this beautiful pupal stage. It's quite fascinating to watch that process happen. And if you have ever observed it, it's just amazing to see the caterpillar kind of shed its skin and just replaced and form into this chrysalis. And they're in the chrysalis for, and I don't remember off the top of my head, it's not a terribly long time, a couple of weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, but I'd have to double check that. And then they will emerge again as an adult butterfly. When they first emerge, it's very interesting. It almost always happens in the morning. They come out and they have to hang there for a little while and dry and kind of get all their parts dry and stiffened up before they're able to fly away. I see lots of people are saying they have found some monarchs, have seen a few, other folks have not. So it's good to hear at least we are starting to see some in North Carolina. All right, so our monarchs, our milkweed is critical for monarchs. So let's talk about some of the milkweeds we have in North Carolina. So there might be 400 species around the world, but here in the southeastern United States, which we are in a major monarch migration path, we have 45 species and subspecies throughout the southeastern US. And here in North Carolina, depending on whose version you look at as far as what's categorized as its own species, what's categorized as a subspecies, there are around 20 species and subspecies that we have. And they're really fascinating to study and to find in their natural habitats, but many of them are really specific about their growing needs and are not adaptable to a lot of landscape situations. So while there's a lot of great native milkweeds out there that are fun to see in their natural habitat, a lot of them aren't going to adapt to our landscapes. This is just a little screenshot from a fact sheet from the Monarch Joint Venture. There's lots of great organizations out there that are supporting monarchs, including Monarch Joint Venture, which is a group of organizations working together, including things like the Xerces Society. So it's easy to find information about monarchs, supporting monarchs, the different species of milkweeds, how to grow them, and this is just one of those great sources. So let's talk about 3 species of milkweed that are going to be the best choices for North Carolina landscapes and pollinator habitat to support our monarchs and our other pollinators, because remember, they're all going to have these flowers that are wonderful for many different types of pollinators. So we're going to highlight swamp milkweed today, which is Asclepias incarnata, the pink one here to the far side, butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa here in the center, and then common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca, on the other side of the slide. And I cannot emphasize strongly enough that common milkweed is really just for habitat areas, meadows, those type of situations, because it is a very rapid spreader. It's not something you'd want to put in a home landscape in most situations, unless you have a really large area where you're just fine with letting it run wild. For our home landscapes, we're typically looking at either the swamp milkweed or the butterfly weed. So let's look at them in a little more detail. First off is swamp milkweed. I was just looking at the plant I have in my landscape, and it has buds on it, but it's not quite open yet. So this is again one that blooms in the summer, as all of these milkweeds do, and they tend to bloom in flushes. So you'll get some flowers, then those flowers will fade and may form these seed pods, which you can just make out here. It's kind of a horn-shaped seed pod, and then they'll bloom again. So you have these flushes of flowers throughout the summer. And for swamp milkweed, or the Asclepias incarnata, this one is a little taller as compared to the orange butterfly weed, which we'll look at next. And it's going to be between 2 to 4 feet tall and about 2 to 3 feet wide. As the name indicates, it does tolerate wet conditions. It does not have to be permanently wet for this plant to grow well. In our clay soils here in the Piedmont, it's typically quite happy. If you're in the coastal plain and you're in a sandier site, it's not going to be as happy. So especially in sandy soils in the coastal plain, you do want to site it somewhere that gets additional moisture, or especially that has heavier soils, more loamy soils, or soils that have been amended so that they hold more moisture. It is a great choice for a rain garden because it can tolerate those fluctuating wetter to drier conditions. And it will tolerate part shade, and you'll often see it listed as kind of the better milkweed for shadier sites. But you're always going to get best flowering in sun. So if you can give it more sun, that's better. It doesn't need part shade. But if all you have is part shade and you want to try to provide some forage for monarchs, give it a try. And as you can see here in the picture, the lovely pink flowers, the typical species does have pink flowers. There are some varieties, cultivated varieties with pure white flowers. So you'll see either white or pink. And we've got bees visiting the flowers here. And this is a picture I happened to take of a couple of monarchs eating a swamp milkweed leaf. So it will definitely be one that attracts uh, the monarchs for egg laying, as will all of our milkweeds. So next up is butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa. And this one has some key differences from swamp milkweed. It's a little bit shorter. As you can see in the picture, it is orange. It actually can vary in flowering color from yellow to orange to a real reddish orange. It's a little bit shorter, usually about 1 to 3 feet tall and wide. Now, both of the two species we're just looking at now, the swamp milkweed and the butterfly weed, are clump forming. So they will form seeds and you may have some seedlings come up, but the plants themselves stay in clumps and they don't run. Now, butterfly weed is the one for dry soils. So it's a very drought tolerant plant. So on drier sites, you want to go with butterfly weed. On wetter sites, go with swamp milkweed. This one will flower again in part shade, but of course, you're going to have a lot more prolific flowering and a sturdier plant out in the sun. So I would try to give it as much sun as possible. And the other thing about butterfly weed, while it is an Asclepias, you'll notice it doesn't have that milkweed common name. And that's because it does not produce the milky sap. So it's one of the few Asclepias that you won't get that milky sap forming. But it still will definitely have monarch caterpillars. Monarchs will use it as a host plant. And this is just a picture. So the first one is kind of a more of an orangey colored, lighter orange. And this is one of the more intensely colored, which is actually on the roadside along the road where I live. So it can have quite intense color. And there's that natural variation across butterfly weeds. And there's some selected varieties and name types that have been, chosen because of the color variation there. So you can find yellow orange or this very reddish orange butterfly weed varieties. And then last of all, common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca. Again, this is the one for meadows and pastures, natural areas, if you will, big spaces where you can let it run because it does spread. It does grow 3 to 5 feet tall. And I've just said it has an infinite spread because I don't know when it would stop. It would keep going as long as it's got space. And it's adaptable to well drain and dry soils. It's quite a tough adaptable plant. Like our other milkweed species, it's best in sun. So, you're usually going to try to give them at least 6 hours or 8 hours or more of sun a day. They can take all day sun. And it flowers throughout the summer. So common milkweed, again, not for home landscapes unless you have a very large area you're trying to fill more for those meadows and natural areas to recreate larger habitat. I just want to mention a few things about planting for monarchs. The University of Kentucky did a very extensive study of monarchs and milkweeds, particularly as it relates to residential landscapes. And their findings included that the milkweeds that were more attractive to egg-laying adults, so when the butterflies were looking for plants to lay their eggs, they tended to found it easier to locate taller Asclepias species. So generally they saw more eggs on swamp milkweed, which is Asclepias incarnata, and the common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca, as compared to the shorter butterfly weed. But they also noticed that plants on the perimeter or set off from other plants had more eggs on them, eggs and caterpillars. So the butterflies are finding them visually. So if it's separate and not in a like kind of obscured in a group of plants, they were able to find that milkweed better. And again, the taller species that come up above other plants around them. So normally we think of creating butterfly habitat and foraging habitat by having lots of plants grouped together, but the recommendation from this study is to actually set off your milkweeds and butterfly weeds from other plants, have them more kind of out on their own and spaced apart so the butterflies can find them to lay their eggs. And another interesting, there were lots of very interesting things that came out of the study, but one of the other ones that was very interesting was they looked at all of the cultivars of butterfly weed and swamp milkweed, which are sometimes termed nativars when you have cultivars of native plants. And they found that the cultivars recruited and supported as many egg-laying monarchs and bees as the wild species. So, sometimes there's question and discussion about whether to only use the wild species, but in this case with Asclepias, their study found that either the wild species or the cultivars were going to be just as beneficial, both for pollinators visiting the flowers and the adult monarchs laying their eggs and the caterpillars developing. And the one thing and you'll see this from a lot of different studies, is don't plant tropical milkweed, the Asclepias curassavica, which is from Central and South America. For us here, it is an annual, although it can overwinter closer to the coast. And the reason the recommendation is not to plant it is because it remains green and growing much later into the fall than our native species and can actually disrupt the migration pattern. So the monarchs will hang around here too long because this is available to them, and they won't migrate down to Mexico to overwinter. Also in areas where, like along the Gulf Coast, where this does remain evergreen throughout the winter, it can increase some disease issues among monarchs. So while you'll find this one for sale, it's unfortunately very easy, or either way, it's very easy to grow. So it is one that's commonly available. It is not one that is beneficial or recommended to plant for supporting monarchs. And I did want to mention, if you would like to learn more about the University of Kentucky study, which was under Dr. Dan Potter's direction, we did host him for a webinar back in March. It was absolutely fascinating and just full of wonderful information. And that recording is available on our EMG intranet, and I've just dropped a link to that in the chat. I know we're a little over time. Of course, you can always explore more milkweeds on the Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox, where they have over 17 different species highlighted. And I'll just finish up, even though we're over a little over time, with a few announcements, starting with a couple of upcoming continuing education webinars we have, which will be posted on the EMG intranet today or tomorrow. So they're not there yet, but please keep an eye out for them. We're going to have Remy Ham to talk about designing gardens for youth education. That will be June 11th. And then Scott Zona, who is our Plant Toolbox manager, will be joining us July 17th to talk about the Design Gallery, which is a relatively new feature of the Plant Toolbox, and how you can get your demonstration garden included there. I hope everybody has their calendar marked for the Great Southeast Pollinator Census, August 22nd and 23rd. This is an opportunity to go out and observe and record pollinator activity in your landscape or pretty much anywhere there are pollinators active. And then you upload your counts and they become part of a database of findings throughout the southeastern United States that's available to scientists to use to track and monitor pollinator populations. It is also a wonderful opportunity to encourage people to create pollinator habitat. So once people learn about the pollinators and get interested in them, then you can encourage them to add more plants to their landscape to support pollinators. That same time of the year in August is going to be a super exciting time for us because right after the Great Pollinator Census, we have the International Master Gardener Conference coming up August 25th through 28th. The registration is now open. This is going to be an online conference or virtual conference. So you don't have to travel to Texas. You don't have to leave home. So really encourage you to visit the site and explore all the amazing speakers they have lined up and learn more about this wonderful opportunity to participate. And last of all, just a reminder that everything Plants, Pests, and Pathogens is on our EMG intranet, including that's where you'll find the recording for today's webinar when it gets posted within the next couple of days, and the upcoming schedule. And with that, just want to mention that next month, we will be back June 24th, and Matt Bertone, Mike Munster will be our feature speakers, and they will be talking about pests and plant diseases associated with weather-induced stress. So always a timely topic for us here in North Carolina, but even more so as our weather becomes more variable. So we appreciate everybody joining today and look forward to seeing you next month.